Señoras y señores, bienvenidos a la Ciudad de las Ideas. Sabemos Ciudad de las Ideas. Y un gran aplauso a Radaíz, que nos escuchan, un grupo lleno de folclore y por supuesto de historia. Como se podrán dar cuenta, la seguridad es primero y tenemos una quinta parte del auditorio o menos. Y ese es el propósito, esto es deliberado. Por ello, todos los presentes pues van a tener que aplaudir como si fueran cada uno de ustedes 6 o 7 personas. Pero qué privilegio ser de los muy pocos que con toda la seguridad, con toda la protección, puedan estar aquí. Y ustedes son parte de esa seguridad. Pasando de esta tarima, por favor, utilicen su cubrebocas, tomen todas las precauciones. Sí, van a haber cerca de 140 o más exámenes aleatorios para la prueba del COVID. Déjensela tomar. Todos deben de pasar por estas puertas de seguridad, pero antes que nada, la encomienda es libertad, sí, pero con la habilidad de responder, con responsabilidad. Y una vez dicho esto, que es importante, que estamos aquí, tenemos el honor de estar aquí, voy a empezar un poco con la gratitud, porque esto se reiterará a través de estos 3 días. Primero y principal es un agradecimiento al gobierno del estado de Puebla, al gobernador Miguel Barbosa Huerta. Un aplauso, por favor, al gobernador, que gracias a él, por su amor al arte, por su realmente entusiasmo del tema que hoy tocaremos a lo largo del día en particular, hoy viernes, pero intermitentemente durante todo el fin de semana, un amante de Beethoven, y por supuesto que hoy se reitera que la Ciudad de las Ideas es la ciudad de Puebla. Amor y gratitud a Puebla. Muchas gracias. No sé si ya se encuentren aquí, pero lo reiteraremos. Esto no sería posible sin el liderazgo y el apoyo de la secretaria de Turismo del Estado de Puebla, Vanessa Barahona de la Rosa. Vanessa, gratitud infinita. Igual manera todo tu equipo, Olivia Salomón, la secretaria de Economía, Sergio Vergara, el secretario de Cultura, todo tu equipo. Por supuesto, esto no sería posible sin la sociedad, la alianza, la creación original y la visión que hemos tenido con el Grupo Salinas y por supuesto en particular con Ricardo Salinas Pliego. Ellos han creído en la prosperidad incluyente desde hace 13 años. Realmente fue hace 14, pero el primer año pues empezó en el 2008, pero planear este proyecto nos llevó ya 14 años, donde visualizamos la necesidad de hacer un proyecto donde la mente inquisitiva, crítica, cuestionadora, donde las ideas realmente generan la innovación, donde el activismo social genera la prosperidad, donde la mejor manera de cambiar a México y al mundo es a través de un proyecto como la Ciudad de las Ideas. Muchísimas gracias al Grupo Salinas, un aplauso para ellos. Por supuesto, nuestros patrocinadores, que ya los iremos mencionando. Este año, sobra decirlo, ha sido un año desfigurado, desdibujado, distinto. Cada quien lo ha vivido de otra trinchera. Probablemente algunos lo han dedicado a escribir libros, a ver series de televisión, a ganar kilos, otros a perderlos, otros a hacer ejercicio. Otros desafortunadamente no tuvieron ni una casa donde refugiarse, muchos perdieron el empleo, algunos desgraciadamente perdieron gente querida. Pero todos de alguna u otra manera, todos nos confrontamos con el estar aquí en el mundo. Como diría Heidegger, el Dasein, el ser arrojados, el ser seres para la vida y para la muerte. Y en ese sentido, pues hoy vamos a hacerle un gran tributo, un enorme tributo a esta gente como Beethoven, como Da Vinci, que lo repetiré mañana, gente que fue resiliente, que sí se contagió de vida, de entusiasmo, que transmitió conocimiento, sabiduría, a pesar de las grandes dificultades que vivieron. A través del día de hoy vamos a tener, sin duda alguna, la capacidad de reconocer un individuo que primero fue abusado por su padre. Realmente fue un padre, pues, psicológicamente nefasto, para decirlo de una manera simple, el padre de Beethoven. Un hombre que sufrió a los 18 años de viruela, que tenía dolores abdominales, que sufría migraña, que posteriormente tuvo tuberculosis. La gente dice que llegó a tener sífilis y que fue parte del problema de su sordera. También llegó a perder la vista. Pero a pesar de ello compuso 500 obras magníficas. La diferencia entre los científicos que hemos exaltado y que exaltaremos de alguna manera con Leonardo da Vinci y los artistas como Beethoven es que si a lo mejor no hubiera existido Newton, digo a lo mejor, o Einstein, o Kepler, o Galileo, probablemente con el tiempo se hubieran ido descubriendo esas leyes de la física que hoy conocemos y que probablemente seguirán cambiando. Pero un Beethoven, si no hubiera existido Beethoven, no existiría la música de Beethoven. Él la inventó. Señoras y señores, hoy tendremos una clase especialmente importante, la conectividad entre Beethoven y los Beatles. Hoy tendremos una danza contemporánea con 20 bailarines que cantarán bailarán al son de la música de la 9ª Sinfonía. Hoy vamos a tener, y mañana, un cantante de ópera, una pianista, una obra de teatro inédita, todo en honor a Beethoven. Y todo esto gracias en especial a Banco Azteca y en particular a Mercedes López Arratia, directora de Mercadotecnia, por supuesto a su director Alejandro Valenzuela. Señoras y señores, Banco Azteca, un banco mexicano comprometido a impulsar la inclusión financiera y, señores, la inclusión artística. Un aplauso para Banco Azteca. Nuestros aliados estratégicos mediáticos. Aquí habemos una quinta parte, una sexta parte del auditorio, pero por streaming, y compártanselo a su gente, por streaming, ideastas.com o ADN, live.adn.com, liveadn40.com, nos están viendo miles, cientos de miles de personas. Y esto se debe, por supuesto, y de manera particular, al gran socio, al canal TV Azteca y al canal ADN 40. Por favor, gracias a ambos por hacer posible que esto le llegue a millones de ciudadanos en todos los rincones del mundo. Muchísimas gracias, socios mediáticos. Empezamos con los socios, aliados, compañeros, cómplices de travesuras. Los iremos compartiendo poco a poco. Empezamos con el primero, One Day University. One Day University es socio estratégico de la Ciudad de las Ideas. ¿Qué es esto? Hace cerca de 20 años tengo el accidente de tropezarme en Nueva York con una cosa que decía: en el Hotel Hilton van a haber clases, pero no clases con los maestros más famosos, no clases con los maestros más cotizados, más populares, que puede ser, pero sí con los mejores maestros. ¿Según quién? Los estudiantes. Los estudiantes evalúan a los profesores en muchas universidades del mundo, pero no solamente por cómo enseñan, sino porque se atrevan a dar cursos distintos, arriesgados, provocadores. One Day University y Ciudad de las Ideas tienen una alianza ya desde hace algunos años para traer a los mejores profesores evaluados por sus estudiantes. La clase que vamos a empezar a ver hoy, gracias a One Day University, es la genialidad, la rivalidad entre Thomas Edison y Nikola Tesla. Verán cómo, pues además de genialidad, también a veces hay grilla, hay relaciones sistémicas, las emociones, la envidia, son parte humana. Y un profesor catedrático de la Universidad de Yale nos va a compartir esta gran clase, Craig Wright, un conocedor sobre lo que hace a un genio, y la rivalidad que existe a veces entre ellos, para que posteriormente ustedes puedan hacerles preguntas y nos acompañen en Zoom. Solo me resta decirles que el día de hoy, a diferencia de mañana y pasado, es CDI Lab. TED Global, solo para darles un ejemplo, su primer día tiene un día no de clases, no de pláticas, no de exposiciones de 15, 18 minutos, sino hoy tendremos clases y pláticas de 40, 45, media hora. Un ballet de 1 hora. Hoy, para los presentes, por streaming o aquí en el auditorio, es el momento de que gocen algo que nunca hemos gozado. No solo la democratización de las ideas, porque este evento es gratuito para todos, sino sobre todo la profundidad de las mismas. Eso es el viernes en la Ciudad de las Ideas. A gozar y bienvenidos. Muchas gracias.
First question I'd like to ask you, who do you think is a greater genius if you had to vote? Thomas Edison, please raise your hand. Nikola Tesla, please raise your hand. For those of you at home, it's the studio audience here, it's slightly in favor of Nikola Tesla. Now, we say at One Day University there are no exams and no teaching, no tests. We lied. Here's an initial quiz question for you. Which genius thought motion pictures should not be viewed by groups in theaters? Of those in the audience here, how many of you think the answer is Thomas Edison? Please raise your hand. How many think Tesla said that? Please raise your hand. I didn't fool many people here. That was actually Thomas Edison. Okay, good for you. Question number 2, which genius was the first proponent of electric cars in North America? If you think that was Thomas Edison, raise your hand. If you think that was Nikola Tesla, please raise your hand. Overwhelmingly, the answer is Nikola Tesla. The answer is, once again, Thomas Edison. Okay, so you've come to the right place. You've come to the right place. There we see a picture of Edison with an electric car that he was a proponent of. Define genius. We're here talking about genius today. As Steve said, I've been teaching and interested in this subject of genius for quite a while now. Indeed, self-promo here. I have a book coming out, HarperCollins next year, Hidden Habits of Genius, Hidden Habits of Genius. And, as mentioned, been teaching this course now for a dozen years at Yale called Exploring the Nature of Genius. And in the first 3 weeks of that course, we have the students try to do just this, formulate a definition of genius. Now, we don't have 3 weeks to wait around to do this. We've got 1 hour. So I'm going to give you a hypothetical definition of genius for this afternoon. A genius is a person of extraordinary mental powers whose creative works or insights change society in some significant way for good or ill across time and across cultures. Okay? Probably works. We could spend more time with that. Here's a simpler one. I kind of like this one. Arthur Schopenhauer, 19th century German romantic philosopher, used metaphor here. He said, a person of talent hits a target that no one else can hit. A person of genius hits a target that no one else can see. Okay, so you know that answer. And that is an important distinction that we will be emphasizing as we proceed today. What makes genius? Oh, she's so smart. She's got an IQ of 140. These people are called geniuses? I don't know. I'm beginning to get a little skeptical about the whole idea of intelligence. And what do you mean by intelligence? What do you mean by smart? Exactly. What does it? Are there not other enablers associated with genius? Well, these may be involved in it too. Curiosity, the capacity to teach yourself. You are curious. You're here with One Day University today. Memory is hugely important. Concentration is important. A vivid imagination is important, particularly as we will see today with Nikola Tesla. Hard work, well, that seemed to have been extremely important to Thomas Edison. Independent thinking. Tolerance for risk, well, they both had that. Self-confidence, yes. Luck, well, that pertains virtually to everyone. So let's start this afternoon. We're going to start with Edison, talk a little bit about his biography. He was born here in the town of Milan, Ohio, south of Cleveland. And then let's see if I can get this. Oh, I don't want to do that. Let's see if I can go forward here. Okay, so here's a clicker. Does that work? I don't know if you can see it. Okay, so here we are in Cleveland. He is born there, and as you see in 1847, he is essentially uneducated in any formal sense. He did attend grade school for a while. He was fond of saying toward the end of his life, I did not graduate, with regard to what schooling he had, I did not graduate at the head of my class. I graduated at the foot of my class. But it was even worse than that because he didn't graduate at all. He didn't graduate at all. He simply dropped out, got some homeschooling from his mother, read newspapers, read professional journals. He was essentially an autodidact. As with many youngsters in this period, they were sent off to work at a very early age. And by this time, the Edison family had moved up here to Port Huron, Michigan, where his father and he were associated with things going on with the railroad. So here you see the railroad being built out in the United States and Canada as well in the second half of the 19th century. I'm going to go over to here, to Stratford, Ontario. Stratford Junction, it was called because there were two railroad lines that were crossing there. And this is where Edison was living and working at age 16. What are those poles that you see there? What are those things? Ah, smart gentlemen. Are they telephone poles? No, I didn't fool anybody. This must be the postgraduate class. Okay, good for you. They are not telephone poles because they weren't invented until a decade later. They were telegraph poles, and this is simply a representation of the type of machine that Edison was using. Here's a more sophisticated one. You see him sitting in front of a more complex telegraph apparatus. What's that thing out there by the blue arrow? Is that a hookah of some kind? Is this some kind of strange pipe that people smoke stuff out of? What is that thing? What, gentlemen? A battery. Somebody says battery, and correct. Because we need electricity for this telegraph. And where do you get that electricity? Well, after working for a period of time in Louisville and in Memphis, sort of jobbing around, working for Western Union, young Edison moves to Boston, spends a couple of years there, and then down to New York. Why would anyone move to New York? All right? What did Jerry Maguire famously say? Show me the money, okay? Show me the money. Then is there. One of my children was fond of telling me that New York City was the only city ever founded really just to make money, back with the original Dutch settlers. Well, there were financiers here. There was capital here. There was a 19th century version of venture capitalists. There were also lawyers. We needed lawyers to put these corporations together. We needed lawyers to file these patents. We needed lawyers to contest these patents if somebody had infringed on someone else's. So here are the lawyers, the financiers, the venture capitalists building out the infrastructure of 19th century America with railroads, telegraph, telephone. Edison forms a company, the Edison Electric Company. Here's its corporate headquarters. Pretty good. The kid's 25 years old, and this is the corporate headquarters. So this is where the corporate headquarters are. But where is Edison's workstation? Where is his laboratory? In New Jersey, across the way here. People in New York are really hard to fool. Okay, so you've probably been to Menlo Park as you pass through it on the Metro liner, right? And then you stop at Metro Park, and this is what the Edison research facility looked like at that point in time. And there were about 20 gentlemen working in this shop, What did it look like? Well, unfortunately, if we go to Menlo Park today, there's not too much that we can see there. Not too much that we can see there. There is an exhibition, but it's mostly simply a group of placards. Now, here's a question. I bet nobody will get this. If you want to see the best Thomas Edison museum in the United States, where do you go? What? Ah, yes, Fort Myers, Florida. Go to Fort Myers, Florida, follow the sun, at least in the winter, okay? Fort Myers. There they have been, this is for Edison. That was his winter residence, you should probably know, and down there they have built a complete replica of this with all the machine tools and all the glass works and the glass manufacturing apparatus that is necessary. So that's pretty cool. And there are other reasons that he was down there that we will get to a little bit later on. With this group, I'm not going to remind you, I'm going to get out of the Socratic method here pretty quickly. I'm not going to remind you, I will simply ask you what the three principal inventions were. Of course, the phonograph is the first of these, but it's fun to look at how this thing works. You have this crank on the right there that turns a cylinder on which is put a foil of tin. He started with wax paper, apparently tin foil, and then you have sound coming into that object in the center there, which is the diaphragm here. Mechanical waves, mechanical energy coming in the form of sound wave, which stimulates the carbon that he hit upon in the diaphragm, which causes a stylus or a needle on the other side, and that engraves bands, in effect, or grooves on the tin as the cylinder is cranked through. Here we see it from the other side. You put your cylinder on, you turn the crank, the needle engages the grooves, the sound goes in the other direction through the carbonized diaphragm, amplified, and out it comes to our ears. It's interesting to think about what Edison said here about the things that he tried with regard to that small diaphragm, materials, because it tells us a lot about Edison's mindset, how he got to a deduction. He said he tried glass, mica, hard rubber, celluloid, aluminum foil, parchment, pitch, leather, chamois, cloth, silk, gelatin, ivory, birch bark, rawhide, pig's bladder, fish guts, and a $5 bill. And as he said at one point in his life, I haven't failed, I've just found 10,000 things that haven't worked yet. And he was going to crunch his way until he found what worked. Let's talk a little bit about the light bulb. So here we have it, and we all know the importance of it. I don't know whether we have incandescent bulbs in this room or not. What would you guys think? I don't really know. Probably incandescent rather than LEDs. And the trick here, a lot of people were engaging the whole issue of lighting within a vacuum tube in this period, and they were lighting things without vacuum, arc lamps and lighting and things such as that. But the trick here was to come up with something that would produce resistance within a vacuum that would generate light thereby, not too much heat, but some light at least. That was what Edison needed to solve. But he needed to solve more than that. Let's assume that he's figured that out, and we'll come back to how he figured that out in a minute. What are you going to do with this vacuum tube that might have something burning in it or lighting in it because of electricity? What are you going to do? Well, you got to screw it in somewhere. Somebody had to come up with an idea of screwing something in, because nobody figured, all right, we're going to screw it into this thing we call a lamp. And we got this thing, well, how are we going to get electricity into the lamp? We got a cord. What are you going to do with that cord? We'll plug it into a plug in a wall. What? You're going to put these dangerous electrical lines inside the walls of your house? Are you crazy? Well, out they go, out your house, up. Well, what happens if we put in too much? Well, we've got to have fuse boxes in there. So we need fuse boxes. We need the electricity going out on some kind of pole. What's that box up there? Oh, yeah, I forgot to tell you, we have to take this down, step down all this powerful voltage, or we'll blow the house to smithereens. We're going to need a transformer. We're going to need, where's this electricity going to come from? We're going to need generators. So it is not simply, and we say Edison invented the light bulb. That's just the tip of the iceberg here. What we're talking about is wiring America, wiring the world ultimately. And that's, I think, the way it's helpful to think of it in that regard. Ultimately, what he did was to come up with the proper filament for the light bulb. And he talks about that here. Let's see if I can get this to play. Talks about that here in a video.
The filament of the first practical incandescent lamp which I invented was of carbonized cotton thread. In the search for a better filament, I carbonized everything likely. Carbonized paper horseshoe lamps were used in the first public demonstration of the electric system in Menlo Park on December 31st, 1879. This is a replica of one of the first cotton thread lamps.
Okay, so he mentions cotton thread there, carbonized cotton thread. Eventually, he went on to carbonized bamboo, and that's another reason he was down there in Florida with Henry Firestone. They were dealing with rubber and bamboo. The third thing that we normally associate Edison with, of course, is the motion picture. Other people were involved in that, engaged in that. He does get credit for fashioning the first motion picture studio, which, particularly ironic in terms of the weather, was set up in northern New Jersey. There's a reason they went to Hollywood, I suppose, eventually. But this is where the first silent films are actually being filmed. There's a famous one from 1910, Frankenstein, and you might want to watch that just for fun at some point. So by this time, really by 1878, 1879, he's already thought of as being a genius. He's thought of as the Wizard of Menlo Park, as we can see from this newspaper of 1878. In 1927, there was a poll taken of Americans. 750,000 Americans were asked this question: who is the most important person in human history? They did not identify a religious figure. They did not identify Abraham Lincoln or George Washington. They voted for Thomas Edison. He was that important. When he died there at the age of 84 in 1931, President Hoover mandated that everyone should turn out the lights for 5 minutes in homage of this great figure. What did Edison get right? Well, he got a lot of things right, but just to, again, to concentrate on the most important: phonograph, magnification for transmission of sound within telephone. Yes, Graham Bell in the telephone, but also Edison in transmission of it, bumping up through a carbon microphone, in effect. The light bulb, motion pictures, time clocks, and so on. Things that he predicted: the video rental system, hearing aids, public address systems, electric cars, and the audio book. He actually thought that the phonograph was going to be used for books and for opera, that you could listen to opera. He thought that was a worthy act. He didn't think popular music should be listened to at all. Opera and books, you could read books in effect, and time has ultimately proved him correct. What did he get wrong? What was Edison's big mistake? AC/DC, and that takes us to the famous War of the Currents and brings onto the stage cue Nikola Tesla. What was this all about? Well, in a couple of very simple words here, and probably oversimplification: direct current. Edison was a proponent of that and had bought in deeply, financially, into direct current. It's a straight line current in which electrons flow in one direction along a circuit. It has limitations in terms of voltage. It loses, as these electrons stream in one direction, it loses power. So it has to be bolstered roughly every half mile, depending upon the wattage you need, with dynamos. It's good for short term, and I think it's even used in some cell phones today and even in some aspects of car batteries. But it's not good for long distances. It's not good for wiring cities. It's not good for wiring America. The proponent of alternating current, how does that work? Well, you have a circuit and you have these electrons being jostled, in effect, along a line. Being jostled along a line, they can be jostled at various speeds, depending upon the frequency that you want to set it. The voltages have the capacity for much greater height. The power can be stepped down through transformers at various points along the way. It can maintain this high voltage power for great distances. And that was the virtue of alternating current. In the end, Edison's campaign didn't work because, in effect, DC current didn't work because it wasn't useful for broad areas. It was inefficient, it was uneconomical in terms of broad areas. Edison eventually got bought out, in effect. He lost control of the stock. Edison's company, Edison Electric, became Edison what? General Electric, and then ultimately, as J.P. Morgan, who was holding all the cards on the stock, changed the name to General Electric, which it still possesses today. All right, let's turn now to Nikola Tesla. We're going to integrate him into our story here. You see his dates there. He was born at the green arrow there, in Croatia, but he was of Serbian descent. His native tongue was Serbian. And if you want to find the finest Tesla museum in the world today, where do you go? Anybody been there? 1, 2, boy, you must have electrical engineers in the audience. Good for you, okay. Yes, here we are in Belgrade, where most of the Tesla papers are, where many of Tesla's own artifacts are, and where they have very wisely and cleverly recreated many of the Tesla experiments there at this museum in Belgrade. We said many of his physical possessions there, including his pocket watch, which will be relevant to what we discuss at the end of the hour today. If you look at the yellow area there, you can see where he first went to college. He was highly educated, at least initially. He went to a technological school in Graz, which means already he speaks Croatian, he speaks Serbian, and he speaks German. He would work in Paris for a number of years, so he spoke fluent French, and obviously at the end of his life he spoke fluent English, so he was a polyglot as well. After a period of time, he goes up there at the top left of the screen to Prague. He drops out of the university in Graz after a year and a half. So many of these geniuses are actually dropouts initially. He drops out, he goes to Prague. He never really formally matriculates in any classes there, and he's studying mostly philosophy and literature. Then he moves to Belgrade, where he gets a job working for all people but Thomas Edison, and in a subsidiary of Edison Electric. Edison is holding patents in Europe for lights and electricity, and Edison is working for a company there in Belgrade. He is walking through a park on an April day, 1882. The sun is setting. We would say that the sun is moving or the earth is rotating. Tesla is a polymath. He has an eidetic memory. He has a photographic memory. He has all of Goethe's Faust in his mind. There's a line in Goethe's Faust that goes, retreating as the sun proceeds back and forth, it pulls new life. As I uttered these words, and this is what he says in his autobiography, as I uttered these inspiring words, the idea came like a flash of lightning. In an instant, the truth was revealed. I drew with a stick in the sand the diagram shown 6 years later in my address before the American Institute of Electrical Engineers. In 1917, Nikola Tesla received the Edison Medal, which must have galled him enormously. But they said in the citation to that medal, were we to seize and eliminate from our industrial world the results of Mr. Tesla's work, the wheel of industry would cease to turn, our electric cars, and they mean street cars there, and trains would stop, our towns would be dark, and our mills would be idle and dead. So this was very, very important. Let's focus once again on Edison's workshop. Here we are, Lower Manhattan, Pearl Street, 1884. Who gets off the boat but Nikola Tesla, having worked for Edison's subsidiaries, first in Budapest, then in Strasbourg, and then in Paris. He arrives, he says, hard to believe, with 5 cents in his pocket. He gets a job here working for, he was brought over by Edison because Edison's minions in Europe, Charles Batchelor, knew this person was a genius and wanted him to work for Edison in New York City. He comes in, Edison gives him problems to solve. He solves them. Edison poses another problem. Tesla, if you solve this problem, I'll pay you $50,000. Out Tesla goes and he solves the problem. Comes back, I'd like my $50,000. Tesla, you just don't understand a good American joke. Tesla quits and goes off and forms his own corporation. Pearl Street is where Edison is. Tesla now is up here a little bit higher in Manhattan. Tesla's first lab up there on Canal Street. Still what we would call Lower Manhattan today. So Tesla has his lab up there now. He begins to license things. He's filing patents. He has licenses. He catches the attention of George Westinghouse. They go into a partnership. So we have to think of Westinghouse, Tesla, J.P. Morgan, essentially, and Edison on the other team with General Electric. They're competing for a contract for the Chicago World's Fair, 1893. Doesn't sound like a particularly big deal. 20% of all Americans then living went to this fair. It was that big a deal, 20%. What did they see? They saw machines such as we see here. If we could, I can point on my screen here. If you look very closely there, it says Tesla Motors. This is one of these huge machines that Nikola Tesla had designed with his polyphase system. What's going to power the machines? Well, you need generators, generating this kind of electricity. Part of the contract was that Westinghouse and Tesla agreed to light 200,000 light bulbs at the Chicago World's Fair, okay? Here we are in Chicago. This is what it looked like back in 1893. The building to the left is still there. What is it, the Arts and Industry Building? People from Chicago, I think that pond or lake is still there also. Is that right? Chicago people here? Last time I was there, I'm virtually certain I remember it being there. So this is what it looked like in the daytime. Can you imagine the transformation? There was no more night. What an interesting way of thinking about it. No more night, the end of night. Inside as well. And if we look very closely at this photograph, you can see up there, Westinghouse Electric Manufacturing Company, Tesla polyphase system. Tesla polyphase system. Okay, let's go back to those generators that are powering all this. Those 200,000 light bulbs, all these other machines. What's going to power the generators? Okay, hydro is one possibility. What's the other possibility, which is actually more what they were using? Steam. So you would have coal thrown into a boiler or a burner, you create the steam, and that could turn the turbine. So, but what they progressively moved toward, for economic reasons, was hydro, where they would take a channel, get an altitude difference, a tube would run through it, the water would cascade through it, would turn a turbine that would be associated with magnets, and the electrons could be separated in that fashion. Here's what it looked like as Tesla and Westinghouse's system go to Niagara Falls. This is actually a little bit later than they arrived, but you can see they're particularly on the right center where those cascading tubes are coming down in which the turbines could be put. Out comes the electricity to stations, high tension wires, off it goes. Where does it go? Isn't there a song or something on the buffalo? No, okay. On to Buffalo, shuffle off to Buffalo. I don't know, it just came to okay, well, shuffle off to Buffalo. That's where those electrons shuffled off to. And from there, they shuffled to Manhattan. So Manhattan got its electricity more coming in from Buffalo from the west than it did coming south up to the north from that Pearl Street station of Edison. So here is a replica of something that happened in Chicago in 1899, where Tesla demonstrates, and this is Tesla behind the podium there, where he would have a transmitter emitting electromagnetic waves to an antenna and receiver, and that antenna and receiver would activate things in the boat. Now, what does this really look like? It all came to life to me there in Belgrade when I had the privilege of going to that museum, of seeing this model, where we have a receiver at the top there, a receiver antenna bringing the sound in, the electromagnetic impulses in. The big black box there is the battery that sends the current over to the tiller the rotator, the propeller at the back of the boat there, make it go forward, and then you have a second antenna here that's receiving more information, still being powered by the battery in the boat, that turns the tiller and has it turn left or right. So that's how that particular apparatus worked. Another kind of fun things they would do is play with these Tesla coils there. My job, I'm not in the picture here, is to go around, put my hand on one of these coils and hold an electric light, in the other a fluorescent type light bulb, and they would blast high voltage electricity through me, which they did. Fortunately, it was a very high frequency, which reduces the force of that electricity. I felt a little twinge, a little excitement. I wasn't wearing a pacemaker, so I was okay. And the light bulb would go on. It's kind of a party trick that they would do there, but it's pretty cool when you see it. And Tesla loved these party tricks because he had to impress his financiers, his backers, financially. And he had celebrity friends there. So in this particular image, in the left there, you see in the background, Nikola Tesla himself in Tesla's lab there, and you see where it was located then. And we have these Tesla coils, which we'll see in action in a moment, blasting electricity to a light bulb being held by whom? By his good buddy, Mark Twain, down in Manhattan there in the 1880s. He was also experimenting with other kinds of high-frequency waves. He had photographic plates in his lab, probably a lot of people did, but he was also experimenting with cathode rays. And by accident, in 1884, managed to take this picture. 1885, William Röntgen discovered what? X-rays. But who got there first? And that's still somewhat uncertain. In 1899, Tesla moves his operation to Colorado Springs, which always seemed like an odd thing to do. Why would you go to Colorado Springs? Yeah, okay, there's hydro there. That's one thing, and it was basically free. He had free electricity there. I'm told, I've never spent a summer there, I'm told that there are powerful electrical storms in the summer, which interests me. And I used to think it was the highest peak in America. It's not. Mount Whitney, maybe it's right. There's Pikes Peak there. And he was interested in that for reasons that we'll see a little bit later on. But what he's there doing is blasting electricity for as far as he can get it to go with these Tesla coils. This is a famous picture. How many of you have seen this photograph before? Some of you. What we have here are very large Tesla coils with his electric bursts that he is sending through open air. It is a picture that is actually photoshopped. Tesla took this picture with him first, but he knows about photography. First, sitting in that chair. Here's a question for you. Is that chair made of wood or metal? How many think wood? How many think metal? Don't try this at home, kid. Don't stand on that aluminum ladder without any kind of... Okay, so it would have been a wooden chair, and we actually know from other information what book he's reading. He's reading a book published originally in Serbian that had to do with physics. But he's trying to project an image of this kind of genius, the genius of the philosopher-scientist. All around him is bursting all of this electrical energy. That was a separate photo, actually. And then he put the two together to get this rather dramatic image. But he is sending out these bursts of electricity. He thought that it would be possible, he thought it would be possible to actually wire America without wires. Send pure electricity, unadulterated electricity out there without wires. But who knew that you couldn't do this? Who knew that you couldn't? So far, we haven't been able to do this. So to show that this would have impact, he put, I assume, incandescent light bulbs out in a field one night, and then put into action his Tesla coils, which set these lights ablaze. Pretty impressive. If you were a horse wandering by in horseshoes, you had a bad evening. But for everybody else, it was pretty impressive. What was he trying to do with all this in his Tesla coils from Pikes Peak? Send this, believe it or not, all the way to Paris. all the way to Paris. He'd been to Paris, he had seen that World's Fair in 1889, he knew about electric elevators, he knew about electric lighting, and he had studied electromagnetic waves with Heinrich Hertz, and knew what was going on. Now, to cut to the chase here with this, let me show you a video.
Tesla invented the Tesla coil back in 1891, and it's an electrical resonant transformer circuit. I'm not gonna go into how it works because I don't know how it works, but I'm gonna tell you some of the cool stuff it can do. Tesla ran a whole bunch of experiments with the Tesla coil, including electrical lighting, X-ray generation, and high-frequency alternating currents. The most ridiculous thing it could do is wirelessly transmit electricity. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. The Tesla coil is also a radio transmitter. It might have actually been the world's first radio, and I'll get into that story a little later. Tesla coils are mainly used today for entertainment and educational displays. Basically, it's just because of how awesome the effects look. But if things fell one way instead of another, who knows? Maybe the world today will be getting electricity completely differently. Tesla was backed with 150 grand, which is around $4 million in today's money, by one of the greatest bankers of our time, J.P. Morgan. He wanted to build a tower that would have been able to transmit wireless communication by voice, images, and text. You know, kind of like the new iPhone 7. The tower would inject electricity into the Earth at the right frequency, and harness what Tesla believed to be the Earth's own electrical charge. Basically, it's supposed to be a Tesla coil on steroids. The coolest thing about the tower is that it would have been able to transmit wireless electricity. Tesla had a vision of providing free energy for the world. J.P. Morgan signed on because he was extremely interested in the wireless capabilities.
But ultimately, he thought about it and said, what did he say famously? Where do I put the meter? Where do I put the meter? Yeah. And he stopped the funding. And the tower was never built. The Tesla's lab was built and fully operating, but the tower was never built. Now, that brings me to my next slide here, because it takes anybody from this area of Long Island, out near Port Jefferson, Shoreham, north end of Long Island. This is what the thing looked like. It was never operative. And it was a huge construction. That's 187 feet tall. It weighs 53 tons up there at the top. It couldn't be made of metal, so it had to be all of wood. It was still in the works as of from 1901 to 1906, and then the work stopped. The funding stopped. It fell into disrepair. Those that were holding the mortgage on the property foreclosed. It turned out that the person holding the mortgage on the property was John Jacob Astor. Tesla had been living at the Astor Waldorf Astoria Hotel, and the money that was used from the sale of this scrap was used to pay Tesla's bill at the Waldorf Astoria. Let's go back to our sometimes annoying film.
This invention, ever so convenient, called the death ray by the media, wasn't a machine that could shoot laser beams like something out of Star Wars, but instead relied on the energy in the free air and electrical force to shoot particles at whatever it's aimed at. Tesla claimed that his super weapon supposedly would have been able to put an end to all war, as it would have been able to bring down, quote, a fleet of 10,000 enemy airplanes at a distance of 200 miles from a defending nation's border, and will cause armies to drop dead in their tracks. He tried to get some countries to fund the device, but only the Soviets partially tested it. For some reason, it wasn't ever manufactured by any country.
Tesla has run out of money. Nobody is funding him. His patents have been bought out by other people. He is destitute. He is making progressively extreme claims as to what he is able to do. He is declining physically. As you probably know, there is a portion of Bryant Park in the park down by the library. There's a Tesla corner there we used to go and feed the pigeons. So it was quite a come down for Nikola Tesla when he died in room 3327. He had all of these obsessions with particular things, such as number 3 and pigeons. And the general public didn't know quite what to make of him. Is this a genius, or is this a crackpot? What did Tesla invent? Remember, what genius is: a person hits a target that no one else can see. Alternating current. He didn't invent that, but he made it practical around the world with 60-second frequency within the circuit. Steam and hydro-powered electrical generators, the induction motor that powers all of these power tools. The Tesla coil, which is involved in the whole issue of robots. X-rays, we still, I believe, measure the force, the density of electromagnetic fields of MRI machines in Tesla units. Radios, wasn't that Marconi? No, it was Tesla actually filed the first patents on this. Marconi filed his own patents, and his ruled for a while, but a few months after Tesla died, the US Supreme Court ruled that Tesla's patents had primacy, that Tesla's patents were the real game changer, but it didn't do him any good at that point. MRI machines, et cetera, et cetera. What he did not invent was the electric car. That's something that came, his association with that didn't happen in 2006. Other things that Tesla predicted: robotics, drones, guided missiles, remote control submarines, solar electricity for air conditioning and heating, wind power as a source of energy, the internet, and the cell phone. He said in his autobiography of 1919, I will be able to disseminate around the world electrical power. He was wrong about that. Disseminate around the world sound, data, text, images, phone, and popular music in a device that will be no bigger than your pocket watch. 1919, he said all of that.
Down there.
Two pictures that sort of sum up. We're talking about genius and the difference between these two. Thomas Edison asleep in his office. Does that mean he's asleep on the job? No, it means he never went home. He literally never went home. He got married. Gentlemen and ladies, you will love this. He got married. He went to the marriage ceremony. He went to the luncheon thereafter, and he went back to the office in the afternoon and stayed there for most of the night. So he never goes home. He works, and he sleeps there, takes naps for a couple of hours, and then goes back to work. Tesla's more of a theoretical physicist here in a sense. Let's try to sum this up with this comparison chart here. Education, limited education with Edison, much more education, formal education with Tesla. Limited travel with Edison, man of the world with Tesla. Poor family man. Edison, what did he do? Well, we've talked about his marriage day. He proposed to his second wife by sending her a message in Morse code. Tesla, however, was celibate. We could talk about his sexuality, but I'm not. We don't really know very much about it. Obviously, hard work we associate with Edison. What did he say about genius? It's 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. Tesla, on the other hand, is this visionary. He has these moments of visionary insight. Tesla said about Edison, he used to make fun of Edison, if you had a needle buried in a haystack, Edison would go through that haystack, picking out every piece of straw until he found the needle. Tesla said, I just go get a magnet. So, one is product-oriented. One is system-oriented. One ended up a multimillionaire, even by the standards of and $21 million back in that day is a lot of money. Another ended up zero. One is an inventor, the other is a scientist inventor. And I'm not sure whether we engage in this now. Let's save it to the question and answer session. So we'll get to it in just a minute, because I want to ask you, which do you think is more important? Who's more important to society today, the inventor or the scientist? But there are commonalities between these two, and there are very clear differences between the two. Who is the greater genius? Who is the more valuable to society? As I said, we'll pick this up in just a moment. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hola, hola, ¿cómo están?
Buenos días. Soy Armando Viveros, trabajo en la Ciudad de las Ideas y él es David.
¿Qué tal? Vamos a hacerle unas preguntas a Craig de la clase. Hi, Craig.
Hi.
Por el momento vamos a estar traduciendo nosotros, porque hoy es sede y lab, entonces la traducción no será simultánea, sino que estaremos haciendo la traducción. Craig, we're going to be doing the translation phrase by phrase. So while you speak, we'll be translating. Pues vas, Armando.
Craig, it's a pleasure to have you here and a pleasure to be streaming your amazing class for all of our audience.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I look forward to speaking with you.
Está muy emocionado de estar aquí y es un placer para él compartir todo este conocimiento con ustedes. Le voy a hacer la primera pregunta que dice así. ¿Existió un desprecio por la obra de Nikola Tesla porque Edison era estadounidense? Craig, the question goes like this. Was there a biased disregard for the work of Nikola Tesla because Edison was an American?
That's a great question. And in one word, I believe the answer is yes. That for Americans, Thomas Edison represented what an American should be. He was hardworking. He was Anglo-Saxon. He had a Midwestern farm background. He came from Ohio. And he emphasized hard work above all else. Remember the famous, as we mentioned there in our lecture, the genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. Just to finish this up, on the other hand, Nikola Tesla was a foreigner. He was an immigrant. He was held in some suspicion. You see the resonance of this today. But as I'm fond of saying in my book on genius that was referenced there in the lecture, it is from these immigrants that we get so many insightful ideas, so many creative ideas, so many ideas that change the way we do business in the United States and around the world. So I would say yes to your questioner. Yes, there was definitely a bias against Tesla because he was an immigrant and because he was a foreigner in the mind of the American public at that time.
Thank you, Craig. El profesor Wright nos explica que claro que había un desprecio por la obra de Tesla, ya que toda la industria de electricidad que se desarrollaba en Estados Unidos tenía a Edison como su número uno figura y Craig Wright, viendo que era un inmigrante y Tesla era americano, mucho del país estadounidense estaba en contra de Tesla y apreciaban más al señor Thomas Edison. Thank you, Craig.
La segunda pregunta es si la guerra de las corrientes tuvo un ganador. Craig, the question is, do you think that the war of the currents had a winner?
I think an unbiased person would say yes, and the winner was emphatically Nikola Tesla, because we are still using, except for one or two minor uses today, we are still using around the world AC current, alternating current, and we are still using Tesla's polyphase induction motor, which is powered by an alternating current system.
Entonces, sí hay una respuesta un poco más objetiva y es que Tesla fue el ganador porque aún seguimos utilizando varias cosas que él inventó. Entonces, Tesla parece ser el ganador.
Thank you, Craig. La siguiente pregunta dice, en su opinión, ¿quién tiene más influencia en el mundo moderno? ¿Edison o Tesla? Craig, the question is, in your opinion, who has more influence over the modern world? Edison or Tesla?
It's an interesting question, and it has to do with who is ultimately more influential, the inventor or the scientist. This was the point that we were engaging at the end of our lecture. I would say as time goes on, the vision of Nikola Tesla will prove to be more correct, because the technology that we are using at this very moment involves electromagnetic frequencies and broadcasters and receivers around the world, and the internet and internet searches and internet communications. So the inventor, almost like a pop songwriter today, an inventor creates things that are useful for the moment. A scientist shows the way for useful creativity in the future, and we are now living in Tesla's future.
Thank you very much. El profesor Wright nos menciona que definitivamente Tesla tiene mucho más influencia en el mundo moderno que Edison, porque estamos usando sus modelos de electricidad y todo nuestro mundo está basado en el trabajo de Nikola Tesla. Gracias.
La siguiente pregunta es, ¿cree usted que la rivalidad entre Tesla y Edison empujó su genio más allá? So the next question is, do you think that the rivalry between Tesla and Edison pushed their genius further?
That's a very good question again. We're getting such great questions. Yes, I think any competition is good. Competition of ideas is good. That's why immigration is good, because it gives us competing ideas. It brings new ideas into the field. It brings new ideas, particularly into the field of large cities. So that I think both of them were driven by competitors. Tesla was driven to some degree by his competition with Edison. Edison was driven to a large degree by his competition with many people. He has said in one of his writings, if you want to make progress, go out there and get some enemies. Go get some competing enemies, because they will drive you to go further. They will drive you to do better. Competition is good, and as Edison said, perhaps sometimes even having enemies is good.
Thank you. Pues la respuesta es que claramente sí, o sea que esta competencia entre Edison y Nikola Tesla los empujó a ser mucho mejores, que la competencia es buena, esto te empuja más, por eso también la inmigración es buena, y que Edison tuvo muchos enemigos, o sea, enemigos que le daban esta sed por ser mejor, no solo Tesla, y eso pues lo empujó muchísimo.
Thank you very much, Craig. It was a pleasure having you and presenting your class. I think everyone in this auditorium really enjoyed it. Thank you.
And I thank you. It was an honor to be with you today.
Muchas gracias.